Life circumstances plunged him into the world of crime when he was only 11. He'd been boxing since he was a child to protect himself in case he was robbed, and he bought his first gun when he was 15. Fortunately, he had enough spirit to quit crime and turn his pain and aggression into super successful hip-hop albums. How to Get 9 Bullets and Survive. How can you earn tens of millions, go bankrupt, and earn another 150 million the next week? How did piracy make him famous? You will learn about this and much more in today's video. You are on the In-Car Stories channel, and this is the full story of the life and work of iconic rapper and successful businessman named 50 Cent. Get yourself comfortable, and let's get started. Curtis James Jackson, who would later take the pseudonym 50 Cent, was born on July 6, 1975, in Queens, New York. Queens is essentially a separate city in New York like Manhattan or Brooklyn, and its population today is more than 2 million people. At the time Curtis's grandparents arrived in Queens, it was a haven for relatively successful black people. Here, for example, lived Louis Latimer, the inventor who improved the light bulb created by Thomas Edison. Already in the 50s, Queens became home to such jazz legends as Dizzy Gillespie, Louis Armstrong, and Ella Fitzgerald. Queens' rural landscape, low bridges, and lack of public transportation made it a great place for those who wanted easy access to the big city but didn't have to live in the heart of New York. Grandparents had 9 children, and in 1960 they had a daughter, Sabrina, Curtis's future mother. She was only 15 years old when she got pregnant, and she always said that it was an immaculate conception, just like in the Bible. She named her son Curtis James Jackson, after his father, but always called him Boo Boo. When little Curtis asked about his father, she answered, quote, "You do not have and never had a father. I am your mother and your father." This did not surprise Curtis because in his area, the presence of both parents was an exception and a real miracle. Moreover, young Curtis never saw men with his mother. She only had girlfriends. One of them even often stayed at their house and helped cook and clean. Mother was a strict woman. Once, 5-year-old Curtis got into a fight in the yard, ran home in tears, and began to complain about the boy who beat him. Instead of being supportive or standing up for her son, Sabrina sent him back to the playground and ordered him to beat up the bully herself. Quote, "If you don't have enough strength, pick up a rock," she added. Curtis went back to the playground and smashed the bully's head with a brick because his mother let him. That's what it was like when I was with my mom. I felt like I could do anything as long as I had her consent, but she wasn't around much. Curtis was only 5 when his mother left him with his grandparents and moved. Besides Curtis, 8 of his uncles and aunts lived in the house. Each of his mother's visits was like Christmas for him, but he was happy, not with her in particular, but with gifts, money, and new toys. Since childhood, Curtis had seen addicted people, and he knew the names of prohibited substances no worse than pharmacists and dealers. Even at the age of 6, he began to suspect that his mother was hustling illegal substances. She was 21 years old, and she already drove an expensive motorcycle. She always had money, although she had no official job. Once, his mother gave him a bicycle. It was not new, but in good condition. Curtis realized that someone had given this bike to his mother for a dose, but the boy didn't care. He got a new bike. The big family was not poor, but there was always not enough. There was enough food, but not enough of the fun food that was shown on TV, the food that made life a good place to live. There was enough clothing to go around, but not enough clothing that hadn't been worn before by someone else. He was the smallest child in the house, so most of the time Curtis sat in the room and played with his soldiers. Sometimes his aunts would arrange parties in the backyard and Curtis would watch them through the window. The aunts took $1 for entrance, then they turned on the music, and everyone started having fun. It was then that Curtis first saw how hip-hop affected people. All evening, people could just sing, chat, but only when they turned on a hip-hop track. Everyone in the backyard started dancing. The guys were rapping, someone was breakdancing, and Curtis watched it from the window and dreamed of growing up to throw his own parties. He was sure that he could earn more than his aunts. Sometimes Mom would take Curtis to stay with her for the whole day. One day, he first saw Sabrina hustling on the street. Although he was only 7 years old, he perfectly understood what his mother was doing. People drove up to her in expensive cars, handed her packages, and in return, she gave thick wads of money. Curtis was surprised that people in expensive cars spoke to his mother with respect, as if she were their equal. Curtis also saw customers. They always walked and wore dirty clothes. His mother drove a brand new Buick Regal, lived in a nice apartment, and later even bought her own house on Long Island. Despite this, Curtis never liked spending the night at her house. Grandma always had parties in the backyard, and although Curtis was never invited to them, he liked to watch them from the window. But in his mother's place, he felt lonely. When she moved to Long Island, her visits became rare. The following year, Sabrina died in a fire. She was only 23 years old. The investigation qualified the tragedy as an accident, and little Curtis was told that she simply died in her sleep. Despite the fact that Curtis did not communicate with his mother too often, her death greatly affected his future life. Even at 8 years of age, you know what it means when you hear that your mother isn't coming back. It meant that Christmas was over. Left without a mother, 8-year-old Curtis began to be out of control. He was never a very obedient child, but after his mother's death, he became uncontrollable. Curtis constantly fought at school and argued with teachers. The atmosphere in the house did not help to improve the situation either. Curtis constantly quarreled with the youngest aunt named Cynthia. Grandfather drank, and other aunts and uncles were often in a state of altered consciousness. It was difficult to communicate with them also because of the age difference, so Curtis spent a lot of time either alone or playing football in the yard. He was a child immersed in a world of fantasy and had no idea that they would all materialize in the future. He spent days looking at the cars that passed by and imagined that they all belonged to him. Literally. But when I saw one and said, "That's my car," I really meant it. I wanted that car, the one I really saw, and I didn't want any other car. When I got it in my head that I was going to drive a Mercedes-Benz, that was it. I knew I was going to do it. Next door lived a guy called Sincere. Sometimes he'd stop by Curtis, open the door of his BMW, and take the little one shopping. An older friend bought him sports suits, but most importantly, Elise, Lottos, Adidas, and Nike sneakers. Back then, these things could be killed or robbed for, and Curtis got them for free. It seemed to Curtis that Sincere was just a good friend, but in fact, he was preparing a successor. Grandma really cared about her grandson, but she had a huge family and couldn't afford to spend $100 on sneakers for Curtis. He also did not share money with his aunts and uncles because they hardly had any. But there were some bright moments with his family. His Uncle Harold, for example, was concerned about Curtis's future and often gave him gifts. He was married to a Haitian woman, and the family business was to transport illegal substances from Mexico to America. Things were going so well that soon the uncle bought a house in Miami and gave Curtis a scooter. So the only people who did good for Curtis were hustling illegal substances. This false connection stuck in his head for a long time. There was no way you could tell me that hustling was a bad thing. These were the people I saw as I grew up. They were my role models. In the early 80s, illegal substances were everywhere, especially in Curtis's house. His aunts and uncles invited their friends to their backyard and hung out all night. Curtis woke up in the morning to find them in the same clothes they were in yesterday. They didn't even sleep. They were so wasted that they didn't even want to get out to get more. So they often sent Curtis. In fact, he did not find it strange. He was not going to a stranger in a dark corner, but to a nearby house where his relative lived. But times changed quickly, and people changed with them. Addiction turned the once honest and good into evil and greedy. Sincere no longer bought him clothes because he was in debt and had no car. And it was he who first persuaded Curtis to start hustling. It all started as a game. Curtis saw it that way. Sincere gave him new sneakers as well as a bag, which he had to sell to his own uncles and get $100 for it. Of course, Curtis didn't go and ask straight. It's just that every time he was sent for another dose, he did not go to the house next door, but took out a stash which he hid in his own room. When the stash ran out, he returned to Sincere to replenish supplies. He was only 11. The more I did it, the easier it got, and the easier it got, the more of it I got. At first, I was able to do small things like buy snacks and fast food. Then I was able to get sneakers and clothes. Then I started getting little handheld video games, but that didn't make sense. I didn't have time to play any games. I was too busy selling coke. It was a real epidemic, the scale of which is difficult to overestimate. Real zombies were constantly roaming the streets in search of a dose. The sounds of gunshots were heard from everywhere, and the sirens of police cars did not stop at night. All this could not end in anything good. And on February 26, 1988, a police officer was killed in Queens. He sat in a patrol car and guarded a witness who was supposed to testify against the gang. The story ended with the policeman getting 5 bullets in the head, and a real war started in the streets. Usually, the cops had no business in such areas, but after the murder of their colleague, a real police wave swept through the area. Arrests began, sweeps were carried out, and for several days the area looked as if the banned substances had never existed. But it did not last long. Soon the cops calmed down and the hustlers came out again, followed by the zombies. The policeman's murder was a high-profile event that started the war on illegal substances. There were more severe sentences for the accused, as well as a law requiring the death penalty for drug lords. There were also special units that were engaged in the fight against street crime. Nevertheless, the streets have not become cleaner. Curtis was too small to be on the radar of police forces, and he was really careful. He worked only a few hours a day, sold only to acquaintances, and never had large quantities with him. But this could not continue for long, and Curtis began to scale his business. Forgetting about caution, he increased the volumes and also learned to prepare these substances himself. For a 13-year-old, he had a lot of money on him, but he carefully hid it from his grandmother. When she saw him with a box of new sneakers, Curtis said that they did not belong to him, but that he just took them to wear. At that time, he wasn't serious about school at all. He learned to count on the street. Nothing I was being told in school made sense to my reality. Even less seemed to be able to get me out of that reality. The only thing that mattered to me was making money, because money seemed to be the answer to all my problems. And although Curtis had a real marketing gift, the street was still dangerous and constantly testing him. The guys he dealt with were much older and continuously tried to trick him. To be able to defend himself, Curtis took up boxing. There was a guy named Freed who invested dirty money in a good business and opened a gym. Curtis was bigger than his peers. At 14, he weighed 154 pounds and was well aware of his physical advantage, but he had no skills. Due to the fact that sparring was conducted not by age, but by weight, Curtis constantly paired up with older teenagers and most of the time was beaten by them. Very soon, Curtis realized that boxing is not only about physical strength, but also about psychology. Of course, he continued to lose sparring matches, but he began to understand why he was losing. This is how the training took place on mistakes and hematomas on the face. The gym became his third home. He constantly sparred with semi-professional fighters and used this experience on the street. People underestimated him because he was overweight, tried to insult or intimidate him, but it didn't work. As soon as someone decided to beat Curtis, it was over quickly. After 6 months of constant training, rumors spread around the street that this overweight little guy was better off not being touched. But boxing was not enough because death was lurking everywhere. Curtis's acquaintances who were engaged in similar cases regularly died in shootouts. When Curtis was 15, he bought his first gun for $800. He was not allowed to go to the shooting range because of his age, so he trained at a wooded area near his grandmother's house. Curtis was sure he would hit the hook when he needed to, but he was afraid he wouldn't. The opportunity to get the gun out came soon. Curtis met a girl who invited him to her home, and on the way back, he was robbed. He was leaving the apartment and saw a crowd of boys in the lobby. Someone tried to stop him, but Curtis silently went outside and the whole crowd followed him. It felt like they were going to just run on me at any second, so I grabbed the .380 out of my pocket and spun. I didn't look, I didn't think. I just let off all 6 shots I had in the gun. I kept pulling the trigger until I busted the firing pin. One bullet hit someone in the leg, but Curtis found out about it later. Of course, those boys did not contact the police and did not plan to look for him either. Curtis had the sense not to carry a gun to school, but one day he got busted. There were metal detectors at the entrance, and sometimes a guard could accidentally search a suspicious student. Curtis was searched a lot, so he didn't carry anything with him. But one day the guard started rummaging in his bag, took out his sneakers, and several packages fell out, which he managed to forget about. His greatest fear was not prison, but in how he would explain it to his grandmother. When Curtis got home, his grandparents were waiting for him at the table. I was going to tell them anyway. When they began talking to me, I realized that they thought I used drugs, but I had to let them know the truth. Quote, "I don't use drugs." I said, "I sell drugs. If you're going to put me out, put me out." They never discussed his mother's death, but at that moment the grandma said that she believed that his mother was killed. Because his mother lived her life apart from the rest of the family, her story had to be pieced together. According to the grandmother, Curtis's mom was at home when someone put something in her drink to make her fall asleep. The killer then closed all the windows in her house and turned on the gas on the stove. The grandmother was not angry, but believed that the behavior of her daughter and grandson was her personal fault. She lost a daughter to substances, and all her children were either addicts or married to dealers. Curtis recalled that it hurt to hear his grandmother blame herself for his decision, but he felt better because he no longer had to lie. And now it was possible to work even more and not hide money from her, and there was more and more money. After Curtis was caught red-handed, he was suspended for 2 weeks. He was not too upset and devoted these 2 weeks to consuming what he was selling. The court sentenced Curtis to 18 months of probation, but this only fueled his enthusiasm. Very soon, Curtis was back in court with all the evidence against him. The day before, he sold some substance to a masked policeman, and that was already drawing a real sentence. In court, it turned out that he was considered a real criminal and not a child who went astray. It was a surprise for him. According to the trouble was the fact that during the probationary period, he was constantly subjected to urine tests, and he almost always tested positive. The expensive lawyer could not help, and the prosecutor demanded another 3 years of probation. As a result, Curtis received 22 months in a court-ordered drug rehabilitation program. He didn't know what it was then, but he soon found out. The program was located in Brooklyn, where an apartment building was converted into a so-called safe space. There were offices, conference rooms, living quarters, as well as cells for those who did not follow the rules. And there were plenty such as do not shout, do not run, do not smoke, do not drink, avoid conflicts, and so on. Each new participant was assigned an elder brother who had to set his own example. Curtis wasn't going to rehab, but he quickly realized it was a long shot, so he just pretended to be on the mend. He went to all the classes, conscientiously completed the tasks, but thought that he would be released and immediately returned to the street. Actually, that's exactly what happened. A real prison was only a matter of time, and Curtis understood that. All of his acquaintances who hustled were either in prison, under investigation, or had already been released, or died. One morning, Curtis was standing outside waiting for customers, his partner sitting nearby. A stranger approached him and tried to buy something. Remembering how the last story ended, Curtis sent him away, but the man proved to be smarter. He approached Curtis's partner and said that he was the one who sent him to her. The girl didn't hear what they were talking about with Curtis, so she took a bag out of her pocket and handed it to the man. A minute later, agents' cars appeared on the streets. The game was over. Since the substances were not found in his possession, Curtis thought that there could be no claims against him either. He was interrogated, sent home, and ordered to appear in court in 3 weeks. Of course, he ignored it, and the police came to his house on their own. They broke down the door, ransacked it, and found enough to send him to prison for 3 to 10 years. Curtis was saved from the full term by being an exemplary participant in the rehabilitation program and cooperating with the investigation. As a result, he ended up in the Monterey Shock Incarceration Correctional Facility, where he had to spend 6 months. There were no spiky concrete walls, no machine gun towers with snipers, nothing like that. There was only forest around. The guards joked, quote, "You'll try to escape and you'll wander in the forest longer than you should serve." The place was staffed by a group of ex-military instructors, so it was part army and part prison. There was always an alternative. You could refuse and end up in a real prison. The routine consisted of hard physical exercises as well as boring academic studies. For the first, Curtis was prepared because of the boxing classes, and for the second, the past rehabilitation center, where everything was the same. The only bright moment for him was when he corresponded with a girl named Donna, but after the release, the romance melted away. Curtis found out that she corresponded with more people. 6 months passed almost without problems, although several times Curtis wanted to transfer to a real prison in order to avoid military training. Walking aimlessly was a torment for him. But even that didn't change him. He came out even angrier and even more confident that he was doing almost everything right. The only mistake was that he got caught. Even after his release, Curtis was under supervision in the Aftershock program. He was required to meet with a parole officer and attend several rehabilitation programs on his release. Curtis would wake up at 5 a.m. and hustle between visits to the officer. He became so efficient that he bought a new motorcycle and then an SUV. Curtis remembers this moment well because he was playing the album Ready to Die by the rapper Notorious B.I.G., who had just died from the shots of his enemies. Before that, Curtis had already listened to rap but managed to lose interest in it. This album changed everything because it was written as if it were about him. When I was hustling, I would listen to that tape, and it would be like Big was sitting right next to me on the bench, kicking what had happened the night before. I could listen to him without losing track of where I was. Actually, Curtis decided to buy the SUV only because he heard a line in the song about Biggie buying it too. This album also features an insert where Biggie is interviewed and answers questions about how he got into rapping. He said he was just looking for a way to get off the streets and chose rap. For Curtis, this was a revelation as he first thought about the fact that money could be earned in a different way.
I don't want to live no more. Sometimes I hear death knocking at my front door. I'm living every day.
It was 1996, and for 10 years, Curtis had been on the streets, hiding from the cops, making dirty money, and serving time in prison. The idea of hip-hop came very early. He was also prompted to change by the news that Curtis was soon to become a father. The mother of his future child was named Tanisha. When they met on the street, she was already in a relationship, but that didn't stop Curtis from appearing in her life from time to time. They met randomly in different places, talked for a few minutes, then disappeared from each other's sight. Somehow they met again, and in 2 months, she became pregnant. Tanisha really made me think long and hard about myself. She said that she didn't like the idea of having to raise a kid by herself if I wound up in jail or worse. That's when I started to think about doing something else besides selling drugs. I had a kid coming, and I didn't want to raise my son or daughter in that world. And more important, I wanted to be there, to be part of my child's life. A few months later, Curtis met a man called Jam Master Jay. It happened by chance and did not resemble fate at all, but his life changed radically. Curtis went to a nightclub where mutual acquaintances brought them together. Jam liked Curtis's style. He drove a Mercedes, was well-dressed, had money, and was also talked about on the streets. Jam Master Jay was a member of Run DMC. It's hard to draw an analogy, but to put it simply, in those days they were like the Beatles in hip-hop. Curtis did not even think that anything would come of this acquaintance, but the next day he visited Jay's studio. Jam gave him a disc with beats and asked him to write something for them. The problem was that Curtis could not write and was doing it for the first time in his life, but at the same time he understood that this was a real and perhaps the only chance to break out of the quagmire in which he had been in since childhood. A few days later he recorded the first freestyle, just an uncontrolled flow of words from the very beginning of the beat to its end. When Jay heard his recording, he started laughing. Master Jay ticked off some good rhymes, but otherwise, it was a failure. There was no structure, no concept. It wasn't a song at all, but a continuous stream of thoughts. But the talent was clear, so Jay said he would take him under his wing. At that time, Jam Master Jay Records had already managed to make a lot of money with Onyx, so Curtis signed the contract without even reading it. He already saw himself as a rap star. He knew absolutely nothing about the music industry. He believed that soon he would start shooting videos, money would flow in a river, and it would be possible to part ways with the criminal past. The reality was not quite like that. At first, he learned to write for a long time, but persistently. Curtis had friends with whom they often wrote freestyles for fun, but soon realized that he did not want to improvise, but rather wrote rhymes in advance. In his head was an example of such rappers as Tupac, Biggie, or Snoop Dogg. At that point, they'd already made millions just talking about the streets, so Curtis didn't feel like he had to compromise and make up an image. He simply wrote about what he saw in his life. In addition to being fun, it also got him some money. Not much, though. The nickname 50 Cent appeared because it was easy to remember. This phrase is known to every person in the USA and in the world. Even when a person just counts money and sees 50 cents, they instantly have an association with it. 50 will begin to apply this approach to everything, and this approach is one of the reasons for his worldwide popularity. In fact, this name belonged to a well-known but already dead gangster from Brooklyn who robbed rappers. His name was respected in the streets, so it was heard. Other rappers familiar to Curtis had notable names and called themselves Pablo Escobar or Al Capone, but Curtis saw nothing in common between small hustlers and Al Capone. And 50 Cent sounded real. The niche that 50 tried to fill at the very beginning of his career was also not occupied. Famous rappers who talked about the street died. Big L, Tupac, and Biggie were killed. Other famous rappers have moved on to the subject of their wealth and success. 50 continued to talk about the street, about real-life situations and real people.
Yo, now I'ma tell you what goes on in the mind of a soldier. I hold a mat down, I don't know how to back.
Jay promised that he would work with Curtis, but on one condition. He had to give up hustling. If rap was going to get him out of trouble, Curtis thought, then so be it. But the career did not start immediately. Curtis had been working with Jay for several months, but the money had not arrived yet. The contract he signed did not provide for any finance, but allowed him to freely use the studio. Curtis had to sell the car and almost all the jewelry he bought during his street life. For many years, he did not experience poverty. He could change cars at least every week, but now everything has changed. He could have quit rapping at any moment and gone back to the street, but instead he sat in his room for weeks and wrote. The first experiments were not particularly successful. He was compared to Jay-Z, who was at the height of his popularity at the time, and it annoyed Curtis. He was particularly annoyed when he heard a line in one of Jay-Z's songs that he had made up a few months earlier. The first opportunity to take part in something really big happened in 1998. Onyx was finishing the album Shut 'Em Down, and Master Jay arranged for 50 to participate on one song as well. It was called React, and Curtis didn't expect it to become a single and have a video for it.
The only thing I ever lost I couldn't find was time. So the feds locked me up, that's how I lost my mind. From behind 4 times.
The problem was that no one knew how to skate, as well as the fact that neither the video nor the song took off. The savings were running out, and this was the cause of quarrels between him and Tanisha. At that moment, they already had a son who was named Marquise, and this relationship lasted only because of him. When Curtis worked on the street, he bought Tanisha the best things. He dressed her and himself in brands. When he gave up crime and there was no money, their life was accompanied by constant quarrels. With their young son, they had to move to another area because Tanisha's mother's apartment was there. If it weren't for his son, Curtis wouldn't have moved a finger. I owed it to my son because even if things didn't work out between his mother and me, I wanted to be able to look him in the face and tell him that I'd put my best effort into giving him a family environment to grow up in. When Marquise was 6 months old, Curtis and Tanisha had a fight and he went back to his grandparents. Tanisha started working, so their son was with him almost all the time. He stayed at home with Marquise, worked on music during the day, and Tanisha took the child to her place on weekends. These days, Curtis locked himself in the studio and recorded everything he wrote during the week. Curtis, who was once the richest teenager in the area, now didn't even have money for a bus to take his son to his mother. His pride was not going through the best of times. The dream of rapping seemed distant and unreal, but Curtis did not want to return to his past life even more. At that time, he already had a certain amount of material, but he was most proud of a song called The Hit. Many acquaintances said it was the best thing he'd ever done. But the question was how to get the track to people. A happy accident helped. In one barber shop, Curtis happened to meet a man who worked for the Columbia Records label. Curtis tried to give him his tape, but he waved it off and told him to wait until he was done with the haircut. Later on the street, Curtis got into his car, put on a tape, but the guy wasn't even listening. He was talking to someone through the window. 50 got angry, took the tape, and went home.
The only thing hotter than my flow's the block. That's why I left the snow biz and got in the show biz. Let's get this clear. It ain't on.
But it turned out that he still listened. A week later, Curtis received a call from the label and was told that the guy from the duo The Trackmasters wanted to meet him. At that time, they were one of the most famous producers in the industry because they wrote for such giants as Tupac, Biggie, and Jay-Z. Curtis hung up because he thought he was being played. Nevertheless, the next day, he still went to the studio and made sure it was not a prank. I just knew that if I got some Trackmasters song on my demo, then I'd get signed somewhere. I was up there for 18 days, and I left with 36 songs. I was doing 2 songs a day. I knew that wherever I went, somebody was going to pick me up and pay the Trackmasters whatever it was going to cost to buy the songs. Trackmasters appreciated both his performance and music, so they offered him a contract. But first, it was necessary to break the deal with Master Jay, who refused to let him go. Jay said the cost of breaking the deal is $50,000. The price was sky high, but at the same time, 50 admitted that if it weren't for Jay, he wouldn't have been able to earn a single dollar from his music. He agreed. The deal with Trackmasters was valued at $65,000, so after paying the lawyer and paying Jay, 50 was left with $5,000. This is the money he used to earn in a week. To assert himself, Curtis went on a daring provocation. For the past year, he's watched rappers flaunt their jewelry and cars while he sat on the bottom and waited for a miracle. He wrote a song called How to Rob, where he fantasized about robbing famous personalities.
When I apply pressure, son, it ain't even funny. I'm about to stick Bobby for some of that Whitney money. Brian McKnight, I could get the nigga.
In total, he mentioned almost 50 names. Everyone got it. From Jay-Z to Whitney Houston, from DMX to Mike Tyson and R. Kelly, Curtis wanted to be talked about. And it worked. Despite the obviously humorous style, some rappers took offense seriously. Some wrote songs in response. And someone threatened to fight and beat so much crap out of the boastful newcomer that the 50 Cent would turn into a dime. The backlash from rappers and their fans was exactly what helped 50 get into the real game. He didn't even have his own album yet, but he was already being talked about. It didn't matter what those conversations were, the main thing is that in those conversations, as well as in the songs of other rappers, the name 50 Cent has already appeared. Interestingly, Jay-Z delivered his response on stage, while 50 was backstage, waiting for his turn to perform. He was pleasantly surprised and still considers it the best line against himself.
I'm about dollars. Who the fuck is 50 Cent?
The really big trouble started after one of Curtis's acquaintances robbed a rapper named Ja Rule. The golden chain had to be given away because some serious men stood up for Ja Rule, but from then on the conflict began. And although Curtis did not rob anyone, Ja Rule pointedly ignored him at meetings. Curtis knew Ja Rule, never lived the street life, but he kept rapping about it. 50 wrote the song Your Life's on the Line, in which he did not mention names, but everyone knew that it was about Ja Rule. The conflict was raging, but 50 did not take it seriously.
I ain't going nowhere, so he used to me. OGs look at me and see I'm what.
The song How to Rob created a stir, so from time to time Curtis performed in small clubs and parties. At one of the shows, he was supposed to perform on the same stage with Ja Rule, but at first he saw him on the street and came up to talk. Ja Rule behaved inappropriately, waved a small bat in front of the public because they were friends next to him. 50 took no notice, punched him in the face, and then took his gold chain as compensation for his insults. The problem was that while Ja Rule didn't have any connections on the street, he was a famous rapper at the time and had connections in the industry. 50, in turn, had a popular single. His album was about to be released on a well-known label, but no one wanted to have business with him anymore. No one wanted to be associated with an aggressive semi-thug who beat people and took their gold for insults. It may have been cool on the street, but it was bad for business. The conflict with Ja Rule did not end in a fight. One day when 50 was in the studio recording material, a crowd of strangers burst into him. The fight was so fast, he didn't even realize what happened. Unknown people ran in, hit him several times, and disappeared. When he got home, his grandmother told him the news. Everyone was talking about 50 Cent being stabbed to death at the studio. Only then did he lift his t-shirt and discover that he had been indeed stabbed. The cut was not deep, but the grandmother made him go to the hospital anyway. Even the toughest gangster can't refuse his grandmother. I felt like everything was closing in on me. I was going against the odds, but I thought I could beat them. The situation worsened until it reached its climax. A few weeks later, on May 24, 2000, Curtis left his home and headed to his car, where a friend was waiting for him. He sat in the back seat because the friend was with the girl in the passenger seat and did not notice how another car drove up to their car. An unknown man jumped out and managed to shoot Curtis 9 times. 50 was wounded in the hand and arm, 3 bullets hit the legs, 1 got to the chest, and 1 to the left cheek. Another bullet hit the driver. 50 didn't die, but the last bullet pierced his cheek and knocked out several teeth, affecting his articulation. His famous lisp is a result of that last shot. And this is truly a miracle.
Yeah, it's a miracle you lived. Yeah. Did you think you were like Jesus had like saved you or something? Like, did you have a religious?
Where were all these bullets?
Well, yeah, you have those moments where you get a little closer connection to your higher power because you kind of don't have an answer.
But where were all these bullets? Because if you're shot 9 times, and you live, it probably didn't hit anything important.
Meanwhile, how lame is this guy who fucking shot you?
Everything's important, Robin. Everything's important.
But 50, how lame is this?
Shoot you in one of your unimportant areas, Robin.
Yeah, right. What's an unimportant area? You're right.
What the?
Oh yeah, he shot you in unimportant areas.
I'm talking medically.
But it's amazing his face isn't scarred from getting shot in the face, right?
I got the little dimple.
Oh, is that what it's from?
Inside, yeah.
As it turned out later, the shooter was Darryl Baum, Mike Tyson's personal bodyguard who decided to make extra money on the side. Curtis took this event as a second chance. The assassination attempt was related to his past life, not rap. The attacker was shot 3 weeks after the attack. Curtis understood who was behind this but showed considerable restraint and backed off. Since he was going to put an end to his past life, the war was pointless. In 13 days, Curtis was discharged from the hospital, but for a long time he had to walk on crutches and do physical therapy. The bullet went through the thigh, causing excruciating pain, but Curtis recovered fairly quickly. He walked a lot, visited the gym every day, and maintained good physical shape. After the injuries, his relationship with Tanisha deteriorated completely. When Curtis was released from the hospital, he lived with her and her mother for a while, but due to constant arguments, he began looking for a new apartment. In the hospital, he signed a new contract with Columbia Records, which provided for $125,000 in advance and the same amount later. For days, Curtis just sat by the record player and listened to beats, which annoyed his girlfriend quite a bit. It seemed to Tanisha that he was doing nothing, and it drove her crazy. In fact, at that time, Curtis was working on the album that would make him world famous. The wounds healed after a few months, but the label still didn't know what to do with 50 Cent. If a fight had a bad effect on business, imagine how a shootout did. That's why 50 took it upon himself. When he broke his contract with the studio, he contacted a DJ named Shamoney XL. They had known each other before, but Curtis was struck by the fact that he was the first to come to him in the hospital. It was at this moment that 50 invented a tool that rappers still use today. Remember when we talked about the story behind his nickname? It's memorable, and the phrase 50 Cent is known to any person. He did the same with music and started creating mixtapes. In short, a mixtape is a collection of songs recorded mainly on already known instrumentals. The text, presentation, and meaning simply changed. Everyone heard a familiar beat, started shaking their heads, and then heard new words and a new flow. 50 Cent thought pragmatically. He perfectly understood that hip-hop is mainly listened to by children. If they don't know your name, they'll never buy your $25 license disc. But they will most likely buy a mixtape for $2 and then pass it on to their friends without hesitation. The business model came from his past life as a dealer. No one will buy your product unless you offer a free sample. First, Curtis needed to build a clientele and get them hooked on his rap. The first song he released after his injury was aptly named Fuck You. In it, he addressed those who tried to kill him, and it was really something new. It's necessary to understand that most rappers who read about murders and crime are actually just fantasizing or creating artistic images. With 50, the situation was real, and absolutely everyone knew it.
The first laugh, hit the last laugh on them, hit the gas on them, pull up and mash on them. It's a lot of talk in the street about.
At first, 50 did exclusives for DJs. That is, he recorded one song and then a specific DJ played it at his performances. To increase his visibility and productivity, 50 simply recorded it a cappella and sent it to all the DJs he knew. They substituted his voice for their own or already known instrumentals, and that's how dozens of versions of the same song appeared, for every taste. I had the contact info for about 50 or 60 DJs across the country. I reached out to them and let them know what I was doing so they wouldn't feel like I was just sending them music. I made them feel like they were a part of something. I let them know that I'd give them every freestyle I made, and I'd give some of them exclusives and switch up who got what first, so it wasn't like I was playing favorites. Curtis brazenly, and without any remorse, reworked well-known songs. He didn't care whose beat he took, Wu-Tang Clan, Angie Martinez, or Talib Kweli. This approach changed the entire industry, even though it grew out of a lack of money. There were no opportunities to pay for the author's beat. Moreover, Curtis could not even afford to buy a vinyl record to cut it for samples. Also, mixtapes often contain not one, but several dozens of rappers at once, but the tape was usually bought because of someone specific. Most often, it was bought because of 50 Cent. And although the labels were not yet fighting for the rapper and largely ignored him, his music was already everywhere. Within New York, of course, the tapes were sold from street vendors, and once in Manhattan, 50 Cent, someone even tried to sell him his own mixtape. At that moment, he realized that he was doing almost everything right. The only thing he didn't like was the quality of the recordings, as well as the fact that all the songs came out mean. He was an angry rapper who poured negativity into beats, although he had positive moments that he wanted to share. He just didn't know how to do it yet. In addition, it was difficult to get a label interested in a song that consisted of one solid verse and did not have a chorus. Labels were looking for songs that could be played on the radio. The song Wanksta became the first real radio hit. It would later be included on the soundtrack of the movie 8 Mile, but at first it was just one of the songs that 50 recorded every day. He did not expect it to become a hit, but the song blew up.
You say you a gangster, but you never pop nothing. You say you a wankster, and you need to stop.
Also, this song will be included in the first official album, but initially, it was released on a mixtape and with the participation of the G-Unit Band. Actually, 50 himself assembled this band from his old acquaintances. He needed a team both on the street and in hip-hop. Tony Yayo and Lloyd Banks were originally included in the lineup. Curtis had known them all his life, but they had never rapped together. Banks was only 18 years old, but his songs were already appearing on self-made mixtapes. When 50 brought them to the studio, he had to teach his colleagues how to behave at the microphone because before that, they mostly read only on the street. Another member was a rapper named Young Buck, who already had his own band, but without hesitation, he switched to 50. Curtis contacted a DJ named Woo Kid and asked him to record their first CD. Woo Kid was the first to agree to take 50's music on a mixtape when everyone else was telling him no. The next step was a photo shoot. Back then, street rappers didn't take the visual side of their releases too seriously, but 50 took a different route. He hired a photographer and took enough photos to make 5 mixtapes. Now, it's difficult to say that the covers of 50's first mixtapes are an example of high style, but they performed their function and attracted attention. Between April and October 2002, 50 and G-Unit released 4 mixtapes, and the response to them was more than favorable. 50's name already had enough weight and popularity that famous rappers agreed to be present at his releases. For example, on this song you can hear Nas, who released a classic album in '95 and was an idol of Eminem.
You could be a rider and ride or a coward and hide. Either way you go against me, you still gon' die.
Actually, the first mixtape was called Guess Who's Back and became a ticket to the big industry after Eminem heard it. About that a little bit later. The way the streets responded to my music was crazy. You heard G-Unit material coming out of every car, every open apartment window, every barbershop. The next thing I knew, they were playing the songs on the radio. First, they would just be played during the mix shows, then in regular rotation, then the songs were making it into the nightly countdowns. That was unheard of. Mixtape songs on the radio? That wasn't supposed to happen. Offers from labels began to arrive after the first mixtape, but all of them did not meet Curtis's appetites. He knew his music would sell. That's why he was waiting for the call. And one evening, his phone rang. One Friday, Curtis got a call from Dr. Dre's office, and on Saturday morning, he flew to Los Angeles to meet with Dre and Eminem. Curtis knew he would sign the contract. He was sure of it. After getting off the plane, 50 went straight to the set of the movie 8 Mile. He was nervous about trying to make the right impression, but when Eminem approached him, it was Marshall who acted like he was trying to impress 50. One of the things that excited me about Tupac was even if he was rhyming the simplest words in the world, you felt like he meant it and it came from his heart. That's the thing with 50. That same aura. That's been missing since we lost Pac and Biggie. The authenticity. The realness behind it. A few minutes later, Dr. Dre arrived. Curtis's songs playing from his car. He came out and asked, "Are you ready to create a history together?" Literally the next day, Curtis signed a contract worth $1 million. Work on 50's first official album, Get Rich or Die Tryin, began soon. The fact is that Curtis already had a lot of material that could be put on the album, but what exactly should go there was decided by Dr. Dre. It was not easy for Curtis because he was used to doing everything on his own, but he quickly understood. If Dr. Dre says it's necessary, then it's necessary. Usually labels release a single and watch the reaction. If it's good, they release another one. The artist gives an interview and in every way heats up interest in himself. Everyone already knew about 50. He performed at concerts with Eminem, was written about in newspapers, so all that remained was to release an album. During the recording, 50 listened to more than 40,000 different instrumentals from famous and unknown producers. Dr. Dre quickly understood what kind of music Curtis needed, and their first collaboration was called Heat. Actually, it set the style for all further joint cooperation.
This deep cock and dump it, this drama really means nothing to me. I ride by and blow your brains out.
Before the album was officially released, it was leaked and downloaded 300,000 times. Usually in such situations, artists try to remake something to re-engage listeners, but 50 decided otherwise. He already had a perfect album, and nothing needed to be changed. When the album went on sale, it sold 872,000 copies in its first week. The album became the bestseller in 2003, 6 million copies. It surpassed Meteora by Linkin Park and even The Eminem Show. Many did not understand how it was even possible to go platinum in 2 weeks, but for 50 it was clear. The title of the album, Get Rich or Die Tryin, is not just a title, it's his life mission.
Many men, many men.
What is its phenomenon? First of all, it's all about his image. Even without hearing the songs from the album, it's enough to look at the cover to understand what the songs are about and who 50 Cent is. At all the photo sessions, Curtis did not release his weapon or take off his bulletproof vest. Expensive cars, jewels, clubs, wads of money. He's a hyperbolized image of a gangster, exactly what the average person imagines when they hear the word. The songs also worked in this direction. That's why they're so popular. My goal was to write lyrics that were evocative enough to capture listeners' imaginations while also being vague enough not to daunt them. And if many gangster rappers can really be accused of fantasizing and making up their stories, the same could not be said about 50. He's been on the streets since childhood. He was in prison, was shot at, and stabbed. All this fueled interest in his music, which was sold in crazy volumes. But you can't sell 1 million copies just because you look cool and have a real story. 50 Cent would not have been able to leave such a mark if his music was mediocre. So the second important component of success was his hip-hop, as well as music created by Dr. Dre, Eminem, and many other producers. It is impossible to overestimate the popularity of Eminem in those days. Like 50, he was a phenomenon, and everyone closely followed the rapper with whom Marshall performed in concerts and recorded joint tracks.
Feels like my flow's been hot for so long. Thinking I'm a f***ing fall off your soul.
Separately, it's worth listening to Eminem's verse where he hypnotically reads through the sounds of the life support machine. Before meeting Dr. Dre, 50 Cent was already a good rapper, but he could be confused with a dozen others. It's not for nothing that at the beginning of his career, Curtis lost his temper every time he was compared to Jay-Z. There's no need to talk for a long time. You can simply compare on a random example. This is how 50 sounded before meeting Dre.
Yo, when you hear talk of the South Side, you hear talk of the team. Niggas fear Prince and respect the Prince.
And this is how he began to sound after meeting Dre.
I don't know what you heard about me. Put up, you can't get a dollar out of me.
The new beats, mostly supplied by Dre, were pretty much nothing special. A regular rap beat, just written by one of the best hip-hop producers in history, and lots of live instruments. Violins, cellos, trumpets, harps, and much more. Only a very rich producer could afford to make such a sound, and Dre invested heavily in his new ward. It paid off because 50 was making money on a cosmic scale. In December 2009, Billboard magazine ranked Get Rich or Die Tryin at number 12 on its list of the 200 greatest albums of the decade. And this is undoubtedly one of the best albums, not only of 50 Cent, but also in the history of hip-hop in general. Reality has its own power. You can turn your back on it, but it will find you in the end, and your inability to cope with it will be your ruin. What separates those who go under and those who rise above adversity is the strength of their will and their hunger for power. We also have the courage to say that 50 Cent was the one who gave the image of a rapper to the mass audience. Think of all the stereotypes that exist about rappers. He wears jewelry and baggy pants. He has expensive cars. He hustled on the streets and got into gunfights. Remember how rappers were portrayed in movies before and even today? Rappers looked like that before him, but it was he who collected these elements and united them with this story. 50 Cent succeeded in what many rappers before him failed to do. He sold the hyperbolized image of a gangster rapper and earned tens of millions of dollars. This, along with the rest, will become his curse. But more on that later. In the wake of huge success, 50 founded his own label, G-Unit Records, where he signed his band and several other rappers. On March 8, 2005, the second studio album, The Massacre, was released, which sold 1 million copies in only the first 4 days. This figure made it the 6th fastest-selling album of all time. Among hip-hop albums, the record is inferior only to the album The Marshall Mathers LP. They also made a special edition that included a DVD with music videos for each song from the album. This track was, of course, the main hit of the album.
I take you to the candy shop. I let you the lollipop.
The album was nominated for a Grammy Award for Best Rap Album, losing to Kanye West's Late Registration. This is an important fact because it was the first bell that the rap of the new information began to take positions from the old ones. In the mid-zeros, 50 generated not only a huge number of hits and money, but also a lot of conflict. The feud with Ja Rule continues to this day, but thankfully it's limited to mutual insults on social media. By the way, one famous rapper also had a conflict with this rapper. You can find more info on it in our Eminem issue. If you're interested, welcome. Follow the link in the description and enjoy. Curtis had something similar with Jay-Z and his wife Beyonce. This conflict dates back to when 50 recorded a song about robbing rappers. In one interview, he even stated that Jay-Z would never have become so successful if not for his wife. Several times, he and Jay-Z crossed paths at various events, but Beyonce always stood between them, so it never came to a fight. 50 Cent also had a long feud with his former friend named The Game. The latter was a signatory of the G-Unit label for some time, but left because the conditions did not suit him. This conflict was accompanied not only by mud in social networks and interviews, but it even led to shooting. Game's associate was shot in the leg when he tried to enter the G-Unit office to talk to 50. In order not to inflame enmity, the rappers held a joint conference where they declared that the conflict was over. But it wasn't the case. Over the years, they exchanged insults and threats, then reconciled again. This conflict continues to this day, but you can be sure that they'll bury the hatchet again, although later they will get out of the ground again.
My P.I.M.P and two of them clips. Holla at me. My niggas put it in for the chips.
In general, the list of rappers with whom Fifth has a conflict can go on and on for a long time. Rick Ross, Nas, Fat Joe, Jadakiss, Kanye West, and Lil Wayne are among them.
This is Kanye West. Kanye West, to tell you, man. And here's 50 Cent. Kanye wants to say goodbye. Say goodbye, Kanye. Goodbye. And now we gotta go.
One course of lectures will not be enough to understand the causes of each of these conflicts. You just have to understand that hip-hop is a rather aggressive environment. People came to it from the bottom when they were hungry and angry. Even after becoming rich, they didn't stop being like that. Besides, it's like a sport to them. Something like fighting in hockey matches. In 2005, 50 was at the peak of his career. His albums were sold in millions of copies, computer games were published about him, and feature films were shot with him in the main role. The crime drama Get Rich or Die Tryin is a semi-biographical story about 50 Cent himself, which was released in 2005. The director was Jim Sheridan, and the screenplay was written by Terrence Winter. The creators did not hide that they were inspired by the success of 8 Mile, but it was a completely different story. The film tells the story of a boy named Marcus, whose story coincides in almost everything with the story of Curtis himself. A mother who hustles, a poor life with his grandparents after her death, then he gets on this path himself. He lives among criminals, but he has one dream: to quit crime and perform on stage.
I could still whoop your head, boy. Your cap could get peeled, whoop your head, boy.
Despite the fact that the film was not as successful commercially as 8 Mile, later it still became iconic. With a budget of $40 million, the film grossed only $46 million, but a significant share of success was provided by the soundtrack. In the first week, 300,000 copies were sold. Later, this figure grew to 3 million. Interestingly, Samuel L. Jackson was supposed to star in the film, but refused because he did not want to be associated with a non-professional actor. Next year, the film industry will still bring them together, and Samuel and 50 will star together in the film Home of the Brave. Like any subgenre, gangsta rap couldn't be popular forever. First of all, the reason was rather narrow frames. If 50 left them, he didn't go too far. The themes were mostly repeated and reduced to 2: I will kill you, or I was poor and now I'm rich. In addition, as time went on, it became increasingly difficult for Curtis to live up to the image that had been established for him on the first album. It was obvious that under no circumstances would he return to street life. More and more often, he went out into the world in suits and not in sports clothes. He made millions, appeared in movies and on television, but in songs he continued to be a gangster. It diverged from reality, and 50 Cent turned into a parody of itself. In 2007, he released his third studio album, Curtis, despite the fact that the album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 chart and sold 690,000 copies. It still lost to new music. The fact is that on the same day that 50's album was released, Kanye West's Graduation record appeared on the shelves. The sales battle that all the fans were watching was left to Mr. West. His album sold 1 million copies in just 1 week. We understand that Kanye is a very ambiguous figure who has generated only scandals in recent years, but surprisingly, it was not always the case, and there's much to tell about him. If you're interested to know more about Kanye, write about it in the comments. We can make his biography, which would simultaneously become the story of his illness. It's also interesting that when 50 found out that his album was coming out on the same day as Kanye's, he promised to quit music if it sold less. Of course, he later pretended he didn't say any of that, but it's obvious how confident 50 was and didn't notice that the era had changed. It cannot be said that Curtis is a bad album. Vice versa. It's a good record with several hits and big names on guest verses. Justin Timberlake, Akon, Eminem, Dr. Dre, and Timbaland. In commercial terms, everything was not so bad. It once again beat Linkin Park's new album and the band The Eagles, but lost the competition to itself. Curtis showed the lowest figures since the beginning of 50 Cent's career.
I took quarter water, sold it in bottles for $2. And Coca-Cola came and bought it for $1. That's something.
It was classic 50 Cent, but the picture in the industry was changing. Actually, 50 himself was changing. The discrepancy between his image in life and in songs was very noticeable. By 2007, Curtis was already a highly successful businessman who had nothing to do with crime. First of all, his albums brought big money, as well as the record label G-Unit Records, where the albums of his associates were released. Let's add to this a huge advertising contract with Reebok and exclusive sneaker lines. In 2003, Curtis founded G-Unit Books, which published his own biography, as well as fiction books. For example, in 2005, 50 wrote the autobiography From Pieces to Weight, which sold 100,000 copies. Not every famous writer is published in such editions. Subsequently, the same publishing house published 10 more books, including 50 Cent's fictional novels The Ski Mask Way and Playground. In 2004, Curtis became the ambassador of the Formula 50 drink and also invested money in its production. The drink, as well as the entire company, was bought by Coca-Cola in 2007 for $1.5 billion, and 50 received his share of $100 million. This is far from the entire list. 50 has a stake in companies that produce deodorants and condoms. He donated a portion of the income to a program aimed at raising awareness of HIV and AIDS. Back in 2003, when Curtis was just thinking about a film career, he had already founded the film company G-Unit Films. He later founded another one, Cheetah Vision. These companies create low-budget action films for the foreign market, and their profits are calculated by hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So, in 2007, 50 was already fabulously rich. He was a real businessman, but by no means a gangster. And for 50 himself, it became unexpected that Kanye's album sold better. Hip-hop was changing. A revolution was coming, and gangsta rap had no place there.
It's the competitive nature of hip-hop. We gotta compete on some levels. You see what I'm saying? Like, Kanye West is a talented producer. In fact, I actually stopped by the studio to see if he could provide a different creative direction for myself. And I heard some of the material that he had at that point. I was like, wow. You know, some joints there, you know what I'm saying?
Well, when 50 said that Can't Tell Me Nothing was his favorite joint, we went with Can't Tell Me Nothing first.
From the early zeros until around 2007, 50 was one of the top rappers in the industry. But times were changing quickly. The new generation of rappers was not shy to experiment with frames and themes.
I'm a fucking homosexual. What? No, I'm not. Threesomes at the motherfucking ball.
Kanye West was not a gangster. He was never shot, but he did not try to be one. 50 Cent and the old hip-hop formation were replaced by people like Drake, Tyler the Creator, Mac Miller, J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, or Kid Cudi. Rap became the absolute mainstream, and harsh stories about the hard life in the ghetto naturally faded into the shadows. It's difficult for most people to associate themselves with the characters of 50 Cent's songs because they've never experienced anything like that in their lives, but they understood Kendrick's reflection, Tyler's dark jokes, or J. Cole's lyrics. It's enough to look at the track list of 50's next albums to understand that his themes have not changed much. Death to My Enemies, Gangsta's Delight, or Hustler. Someone will say that this is dedication to their style, and some can call it self-repetition. But 50 would not be a successful man if he did not understand where the wind was blowing. In favor of this fact is the fact that after the album Curtis, he released only 2 records, in 2009 and in 2014, and focused on business. The album Before I Self-Destruct was released in 2009. Only 160,000 copies were sold in the first week, the worst result in his career. And again, it's hard to say it's a bad album. Musically, it's in no way inferior to the previous ones. Instrumentals from Dr. Dre and other mastodons, joint tracks with Eminem and R. Kelly, the same set of themes, and the same 50 Cent. The reviews were rather negative. Many wrote about self-repetition, lack of originality, and exploitation of the same themes. There were also positive reviews, but most of them agreed that this album could have been better if it had been released a few years earlier. During the recording, 50 was engaged not only in music, but also in the shooting of the movie of the same name, which was released shortly after the album release. This is a crime drama with Curtis in the lead role. He acted as a director, producer, and even a screenwriter. But it cannot be said that 50 did not try to experiment. After an apparently unsuccessful album, Curtis decided to go in a completely different direction and create an album in the Eurodance style. Once he was in a nightclub, heard similar music, and was so inspired that he went to the studio and wrote something in this style. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, this experiment remained on the shelf and never came out. Instead of releasing a new album, 50 toured with Eminem and supported his album, Relapse. Eminem and 50 remain good friends, and to this day, moreover, they call themselves best friends.
I always want to do stuff that, when we're doing stuff from music, that fits it reminds you of who's this guy?
This friendship began when 50 came to the set of 8 Mile. During the first album recording, Eminem spent a lot of time in the studio with 50, giving advice, producing some songs, and even editing his lyrics. Their friendship is famous for their support and iron loyalty to each other. No matter who Eminem is in conflict with, there is no doubt that 50 will stand up for him, and vice versa. The story with Ja Rule is the best example. They appear on each other's albums, support each other on concert tours, and for all these years, there's been no public conflict between them. 50 supported Eminem through the worst periods of his life when he was struggling with addiction and dealing with the death of a friend named Proof.
Hip-hop is black music, without question. And unfortunately for some people, it's tough to accept that you got a white artist that does it better than black artists.
The next 4 years were not so much about music as about business, philanthropy, and numerous promises to release a new album. It was originally supposed to be called Black Magic, but Curtis changed the name when he cooled down to the Eurodance theme. In 2011, he wrote that the album would be titled Before I Self-Destruct 2, and then changed it once again to Street Gang Immortal. The latter even released a hit single with Eminem and the lead singer of the band Maroon 5.
Now when you hear him, it may sound like it's some other shit, cause I'm not writing anymore, they not make.
Also, the album was not released due to some disputes with the Interscope Records label. It came as a surprise to many when 50 Cent left the label and went free swimming. According to the contract, he had to make another album, but Dre and Eminem did not take the case to court. I'm a special case and situation. It's also because of the leverage of having the strong relationships with Eminem and Dr. Dre. They don't want me to be uncomfortable. They value our friendship to the point that they would never want to jeopardize it over that little bit of money. There have been rumors of a disagreement between Dre and 50 for a long time. Much later, Curtis admitted that it was about the headphones and the competition. The fact is that Dre was the founder of the headphone company Beats by Dre, and 50 was simultaneously developing his company, which worked in the same direction. There was no conflict. Dre continued to do his business, 50 his, only now not under the same label. Today they're on good terms and often appear together at major events.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to welcome the newest member of the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Dr. Dre!
At the same time, Curtis was not only engaged in headphones, but also developed his other businesses. For example, he became a boxing promoter and founded the company The Money Team. Proceeding from the reverse, in the same year, Curtis became a shareholder of a Dutch company that produces vodka. He later signed a $78 million contract with an underwear brand. Curtis also wisely invested his music earnings in private companies, real estate, and stocks throughout his career. In January 2011, he earned $10 million from a series of tweets promoting a clothing company. Alcoholic and energy drinks, sports mixtures, apps, clothing, a super successful show on the channel Stars, his own label, film companies, securities, huge estates. He got really rich and didn't die trying, although he became bankrupt. We'll talk about this later, but for now we'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. This motivates us to continue making long and informative videos about interesting people from the music industry. Thank you very much, and let's continue. Almost immediately after leaving the label, 50 announced that his new album, Animal Ambition, will be released in 2014. Subsequently, the first single, Funeral, was released on the Forbes website.
Flowers, funeral service, the kids in the coffin. It sounds so familiar, don't it happen so often?
The album debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200, making 50 Cent's 5th consecutive top 5 country album. However, sales were modest, just 46,000 copies in its first week, and reviews were mixed. The record was presented by Curtis himself as conceptual, but in fact it was the same 50 Cent. Brutal, aggressive, a little clubby, but the same. Critics wrote that 50 was stuck in his own purgatory from which he could not get out for 10 years, but everyone hopes that he'll succeed. Animal Ambition half-assedly pimps the phony idea perpetuated by his Jesse Pinkman-like core fans and an increasingly clueless 50 Cent himself, that his success was built on bona fide gangster rap swagger rather than incredibly accessible club bangers. To date, this is 50 Cent's last studio album. He released collections of the best tracks and singles and sometimes appeared as a guest on other people's albums. Curtis focused on business and producing other artists. For example, in 2020, Curtis took on the duties of executive producer and released the debut album of the late rapper Pope Smoke. 50 contacted famous rappers to invite them to participate in the recording of the record. In this way, it was 50 who brought the unfinished work to the end, thus fulfilling the last dream of the late rapper.
I met him. We was talking, and I was like, yo, I'm watching him, right? This nigga keep playing with his phone. Like, you know, these little niggas play with their phone all the time, bro. I'm like, yo.
An interesting and rather strange story happened in 2015. The successful and cosmically wealthy 50 Cent suddenly went bankrupt. The fact that Curtis filed for bankruptcy does not mean that he lost absolutely all of his money. Of course, he made mistakes. Sometimes he invested his money incorrectly. Besides, the crisis of 2008 hit his fortune as well. Big businessmen often do such tricks when they realize that they can lose all their money. It all started with the fact that 50 became a participant in the case for the protection of honor and dignity. The victim demanded $5 million from him for the fact that he published a video of an obscene nature on the internet in which the victim recognized herself. It was the ex-girlfriend of a rapper named Rick Ross. He was sued by former business partners. He was also accused of plagiarizing the design of headphones that the rapper sold. Specifically, this case cost Curtis $17 million. Losing case after case, Curtis sued his lawyers and along with it filed for bankruptcy. It was a chance to start over, and Curtis wouldn't be 50 Cent if his career and life ended there. Bankruptcy allowed him to create himself from scratch once again, in particular as an executive producer and actor of the successful American crime drama series The Power. Shortly after the bankruptcy filing was announced, he signed a new $150 million deal. So there's an impression that 50 Cent will not disappear. Curtis James Jackson is 48 years old today. He also lives in the city of Houston because there is a very favorable environment for rap artists. For example, there's no income tax for rappers, screenwriters, and other people with creative professions. As for his personal life, in this regard, Curtis can be called a lone wolf. After parting with his first wife, he was no longer married. Maybe because his ex sued him in 2009 demanding $50 million. All because, according to her, Curtis promised to take care of her for the rest of her life. the claim was rejected. In 2003, 50 met with actress Vivica Fox, but they lasted less than a year. At the end of the zeros, Curtis met with model Daphne Joy, who later in 2012 gave birth to his son. They named the boy Sire Jackson. Already at the age of 2, the boy earned his first million, starring in an advertisement for Kids Safe, a brand that manufactures children's headphones. With Daphne, the mother of Curtis's second child, a long relationship did not work out either, and according to tradition, she also sued her ex-boyfriend. An argument broke out between them during which 50 destroyed her personal belongings, for which he received a 3-year suspended sentence. The story continued when Curtis sought sole custody of the child, and in response, Daphne Joy accused him of physical abuse. The case did not go to court, but Curtis was not allowed to be the sole guardian. Perhaps constant problems with former lovers made Curtis think and take radical measures. So, for example, in 2024, he announced he would spend this year abstaining from intimate life. Business projects take up too much time to be distracted by carnal pleasures. Instead, he planned to meditate and focus on larger goals. Curtis's eldest son, Marquise, is 28 years old now. There was always a difficult relationship between them since Marquise saw his father mainly on TV and in person no more than once a month. In one interview, Marquise said this about his father. He wasn't really around enough. Kind of dwindled down as time went on and certain events happened. For me, I just started feeling differently about him because growing up, my dad was my superhero. He's on television, he does this, he does that. He'd take me to school. It was like having a father who's Superman, more or less. With time, their relationship did not improve. On the contrary, Marquise once posted a photo with the son of the rapper who was suspected of assaulting his father in the early 2000s. 50 commented on the photo saying, "If you both get hit by a bus, it would make my day." Marquise likes to post pictures with his father's competitors, and sometimes even with his enemies. He often takes their side and pokes fun at his father on social media. Nevertheless, 50 paid his ex-wife $1.5 million, which went to support his son. With another son now, who is now 11 years old, 50 has a completely different relationship. He regularly publishes photos with Sire, they're seen together on walks, as well as on red carpets. Curtis has officially shelved his next album, Street King Immortal, after 10 years of work on it, and it's likely he will release a completely different record in the future. Now the main activity of 50 is, of course, business, but not only. Together with the Houston Independent School District, they began a partnership and a project on the basics of business and enterprise for school students. In addition, Curtis continued to act in films. In 2023, he starred in the 4th part of the film The Expendables. He also continues to write screenplays and is an executive producer of several shows on the Starz channel. Before the bankruptcy story, 50 Cent ranked 4th on the list of the richest hip-hop artists. Forbes magazine estimated his fortune at $155 million. After bankruptcy, 50 recovered for a while, but an innate business streak as well as smart planning, various businesses and projects allowed him to earn more than $40 million. Obviously, this number will only grow. Now, 50 hides his place of residence, but it's known that he has houses not only in America, but in Africa. The fact that 50 rewards himself for his achievements with cars speaks volumes about his financial status. Lamborghini Murcielago, Chevrolet Impala, Bugatti Chiron are just a small part of his fleet, which includes more than 10 incredibly expensive cars. 50 Cent's career was like an explosion, or rather a shot. Having set himself the goal of getting rich, he devoted his life to this idea. Having become rich illegally, he rethought his life, gave up everything, and then achieved this goal in a legal way. His approach prevented Curtis from dying on the streets like many of his acquaintances, and his intelligence and talent made him not only an iconic rapper, but also a successful businessman. It's quite obvious that music is not in the forefront for Curtis right now, but it's also clear that he hasn't said everything he wanted to say. In addition, Eminem constantly persuades 50 to release a new album. We think he will listen to his best friend. If you like this video, on our channel you'll find a large number of interesting videos about outstanding personalities. Click on the icon that appeared on your screen and watch one of them. And you were watching the Inco Stories channel. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.